Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, thank you all for coming. The first word for tonight is a word of warning. On not a few occasions when giving this talk, certain people end up raising their voices, not only at the speaker, but among themselves. Just a quick story, just to illustrate this. At one parish where I was giving this talk, there was a gentleman there who, I'd say he was in his 70s, had this very, very gentle smile on his face, very content, very, very happy. Suddenly got talking about pain and suffering and all this, and his wife just threw up her hand and she said, "I can't stand pain! I don't like suffering and I hate hospitals." Sorry. "If something were to happen to my husband, I'd pull the plug." And that gentle smile went off his face. He turned and he looked at his wife and he said, "You would kill me!" At which point they began to fight and fight and fight. Happily, the pastor is a former police officer, and so he had to resort back to his old work and escort them out. Bioethics is the intersection of medicine, law, and ethics concerning the human person. Tonight, we're going to touch on the human person in terms of the human person, pain, and death. There's a scientific explanation for the human body in all of its functions. Now, those of you who are here from the medical community, you are the experts in all of the scientific explanations. I'm not. If someone asks a question about medicine, I'm going to point to someone out here. Why are you here then? Well, for some it's because you get the CME credit, but beyond that, it's because you believe or you are interested in learning about a perspective of the human person that believes there's more, that there's more. You're here because you believe you are interested in learning about a perspective that the person is more than just a body. You believe or you're interested in learning more about a perspective that believes that there's a part of the human person that is more, that goes beyond the body, and we call that part the soul. Those of you from the medical community can give us scientific explanation of pain, perhaps an evolutionary response for preservation. Perhaps many of you could speak on how to treat pain much better than I ever could. Why are you here then? Because you believe or you are interested in learning more about a perspective that believes that there is more. You're here because you believe or you're interested in learning more about a perspective that believes, like Bishop Strickland wrote in the Catholic East Texas a couple months back, that pain is more than just a response for preservation. You're here because you believe or you're interested in learning more about a perspective that believes that pain can be redemptive. Pain can somehow save another person. Those of you from the medical community can give a scientific explanation of death and what transpires when someone dies. You're here because you believe or you're interested in learning more about a perspective that believes that there's more to death than just that. That there's more to life than life on earth. That the definition of life within it, a very tiny part, is life on earth. Because life after death is eternal. The medical professionals here are the experts in all the scientific explanations of the human body, pain, and death. My field, then, is those parts of the human person that are more, that go beyond the material, what we can see with our eyes. But those things are just as real and just as important as the material. So, let's begin this whole notion of suffering. None of us want to suffer. None of us want to have pain. And so from the Catholic Christian perspective, this is where it gets very, very interesting. Indeed, if there isn't any hope of getting rid of our suffering and our pain, the easiest solution to end it is to end my life. But for the Catholic Christian, we see pain in a completely different light. And that's because, about 2,000 years ago, someone suffered a lot of pain. And we believe that his suffering, his pain was not in vain, but because he suffered, because he had this pain, we were saved from our sins. We still are saved from our sins. And therefore, from the Catholic Christian perspective, pain can be used in the same way that Jesus used it to save others. So, you don't have to answer out loud, but think in your minds. Who do I know who needs prayers? Who do I know that needs to be saved from something? All of us have pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain. We can do like Jesus did. Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. Father, I offer up the pain that I'm experiencing right now for that person, for my wife, for my kids, for my mother, for my father, for my grandparents, for my neighbor who lost his child, whoever it might be. We can't see what's going on with our eyes, just in the same way we can't see that we've been saved from of our sins by Jesus Christ suffering and dying on the cross for us. And this is what St. Paul meant when he said, I make up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. It's not that, well, Jesus, you fell a little short dying on the cross there. You didn't quite get there. No, he did. But because all of us suffer, we can take our sufferings and unite them to Christ on the cross. It's that phrase that some of us grew up hearing, offer it up. And sometimes that's hard, but if we attach an intention to it, we have a reason that, okay, I can take this, I can use this. Can't see it with my eyes. But in the economy of salvation, there's all kinds of transactions that are taking place right now in heaven. And perhaps God will use the pain and suffering that I'm experiencing for the well-being of someone else. This is fundamental for us Christians. The redemptive nature of suffering. With that being said, now we can enter into the end of life, a typical time when folks do experience lots of suffering, lots of pain. What has the Catholic Church taught about the end of life in terms of healthcare means? Interestingly, not that much. And as we'll see as we go through the history of this, it does start fairly vague and it gets more specific as we go in time. But we would think that the Catholic Church would have volumes and volumes and volumes of stuff. I can summarize everything that the Catholic Church has taught about this on one sheet of paper. Because some of this gets hard. So the first time that the Catholic Church spoke about end-of-life healthcare means was in 1957. When Pope Pius XII, in an address to anesthesiologists, made the distinction between, and this is the vocabulary, ordinary and extraordinary means. He defined ordinary means as means that don't involve a great burden, period. Extraordinary means then are those means that do involve a great burden. How can we understand this? So, my favorite example, a few years ago, the king of Saudi Arabia needed a very, very particular type of surgery. There was only one surgeon in the whole world supposedly who could do this. He was in New York City, so the king of Saudi Arabia got on his personal 747 jumbo jet, flew to New York City, had his surgery, recovered, and then flew back home. Now, I don't know about any of you all, But I don't have a 747 in which I could just pop into to fly up to New York City, that enormous cost and so forth, disruption of my life, etc., etc. That was not a grave burden for the King of Saudi Arabia. Perhaps that would be a grave burden to you. So, what if there isn't any surgeon, a doctor in the part of the world in which I live that has the type of surgery that can operate on me the way I need done? Am I obligated to go to New York City? Well, if that's a grave burden, then no. But what if I still want to do it, like the King of Saudi Arabia? You're fine. Go ahead. It's not that you can't do something that's a grave burden to you, but you're not obligated to do it. Nor is one prohibited to do more than what is necessary to conserve health. The Vatican was more or less silent about these issues until 1980, when the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith published a document called the Declaration on Euthanasia, in which it added 2 more words. So we already spoke about ordinary and extraordinary means of preserving life. It wished to introduce the terms proportional and disproportional means. Proportional and disproportional means in terms of the type of treatment, the degree of complexity, the cost, this is important, and the possibility of using it. Now, when we speak about proportion and disproportionate means, this is comparing results with expectations, accounting for physical and moral resources. So, Grandma is here. We love her very, very much. Her particular condition, though, she's going to die in a matter of a couple days or weeks. If we do this $1 million surgery, we might add 1 day to her life. It's kind of just a simple example, but this is not in proportion at that particular point. Obviously, those in the medical field would know, yeah, if you're doing a surgery like that, the surgery would probably kill the person and therefore wouldn't even live that long. But nonetheless, you can see the point. That even that, we take these things into proportion. Based upon the treatment we're going to put in, what is the expected proportion of results back from this? This is why at a certain point, someone who's been diagnosed with cancer, they might say, after the 4th round of chemotherapy, Doc, how much longer am I going to live after this? Well, if we do this, you might live another month, 6 months, something like that. Then all of that pain, all of that suffering, having to travel back and forth, the throwing up, the loss of sleep, no. It's not in proportion for me. I would rather have 6 weeks of fairly stable life than to have 3 months of that. That's within proportion. Good. We can see how this then, quality of life, we see is in terms of the types of treatment. Quality of life is a term that the Catholic Church uses, but not in the secular sense of, well, look at you, you can't walk, you don't have any quality of life, and therefore we should end it. No. Just like in the example with the cancer patient, that, okay, if you take on these types of treatments, your ability to function the way you ordinarily have for most of your life isn't going to be that way, and therefore your quality of life in one sense will diminish in this way. We take this into consideration in terms of the treatments. The very next year, the Vatican published another document called Cor Unum, One Heart, in which it reiterated the use of this second grouping of terms, proportional and disproportional, as a means and as an end, and said that the Church, in a sense, prefers those terms over ordinary and extraordinary. Again, ordinary, those things that aren't a grave burden. It's kind of vague. But the document also had a line that's very, very interesting, most especially for the pro-life movement here in the United States. It says very succinctly, life in the world is of primary but not absolute value. Life in the world is of primary but not absolute value. Remember, the Catholic Christian, the definition of life is more than just this thin segment of life on earth. There's this whole eternal life afterwards in which we have to take into consideration. And if that's the case, this is therefore why at a certain point we can say, stop. Stop. I have a sister who's an emergency room doctor in Dallas. She's received national recognition for her work. So it's not just me who's biased. It says she's one of the best in America. But she's told stories of how, the one I remember most, a teenage kid was in a car accident. She said they brought him in pieces. She's so good, she put him back together because the family said, do anything, save him, whatever it takes. Okay. Yes, in that particular moment, that would be the response that all of us have when a loved one is injured like that. But let's just use that instance, because what happened the week after all the emotions went down, after my sister sewed him back up, the family looked at their loved one and said, is this the way he's going to be the rest of his life? Yes. He'll probably never come out of the coma. He will be confined to a bed for the rest of his earthly life. Now, I don't want to make a judgment about that family. Again, all of us would have said the same thing, but we can understand that, okay, yep, life is not of absolute value, but it is of primary value. That we as Christians have the hope of everlasting life, that even if this loved one passes away, I will get to see him, I will get to see her when I pass through death to the next life. We're not obligated then to do whatever it takes at all costs to keep myself alive. Even we can imagine, yes, that what if the breadwinner of the family gets some sort of terminal disease and he's thinking, I need to work as hard as I can to save enough money to put it in the bank, that way my wife doesn't have to work too hard as she takes care of the kids. Perhaps he even makes the conscious decision that I'm going to forgo expensive treatment that I might have to pay for the sake of my family. Yes. Once again, because life is of primary but not absolute value. Does that make sense? Some folks, understandably, particularly in the pro-life movement, it gets taken all the way to an extreme, Do whatever it takes. No. That's not Catholic Church teaching. Because for us, life continues after life on earth. In 1985, Blessed John Paul, and he's now St. John Paul II, made some comments at an international congress on human pre-leukemia, in which he said, we cannot relish the commitment to valid treatments for sustaining life. So if there are things we can do to sustain the person's life, we need to do that, particularly in an advanced country like ours. At the same time, it's not licit to omit care with the aim of shortening life, most especially to spare the patient or his family from suffering. It's not only the patient, our loved one, who's there in the bed, but we suffer when we have to watch our loved one in the bed. This is hard. We remember them walking around, laughing, having a good time, and now they're like this. We just want it to end. And so that's when the temptation comes. Well, the quick way to end this is to end this person's life. Would you like to make this decision? Well, if I say yes to that, I have the further intention of ending the person's life. This is where it becomes problematic. I remove nutrition and hydration so that he dies. This is a problem. That's the intention of murder, or as we call in the medical field, euthanasia. The Catechism of the Catholic Church has a paragraph in which it says, "The interruption of uncomfortable, dangerous, extraordinary, and disproportionate means is licit." So, yes, a sick person with cancer, some terminal disease, whatever it might be, they will eventually reach a stage in their lives where the treatment that they are receiving is uncomfortable. Then it can be stopped. It can be dangerous. If we continue this, it might end the person's life. Well then, if you want to stop, stop. Feel free to do so. Extraordinary. Remember, it's a grave burden. It's not a problem here in Tyler. I used to be the administrator of St. Joseph in Clarksville, and in Red River County, there's no hospital. Zero. Some folks have to drive over an hour to get to the closest hospital. Well, if you need to do kidney dialysis, 3-4 times a week, driving at least 1 hour one way back, at a certain point they just say, enough. Lord, I'm sorry, but I can't. It's okay. It has become a grave burden then at that point. We don't have to take it anymore. And obviously disproportionate means we can interrupt these things. Perhaps the patient, the loved one, is receiving these types of treatments, and that's when it gets hard, because we think, well, if I remove the treatment, I bring about the person's death. Well, if you're removing the treatment to bring about the person's death, if that's what you want, well, that's a problem. But if the treatment is dangerous, if it's uncomfortable, if it's extraordinary, if it's disproportionate, and that's the reason why we remove it, okay, our conscience can be clear. John Paul II, in 1995, clarified this and reiterated it, that renouncing certain therapies is not the same thing as euthanasia. The former is acceptance of the human condition, that this person is about to die, once again, because life is of primary but not absolute value. If they're about to die, we don't have to do everything possible to keep this person alive. And so, Lord, it looks like you're coming. And so, all right, spoken to our loved one, maybe our loved one is unconscious, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. We've reached a point where we need to pull treatment because it's become uncomfortable, it's disproportionate, it's extraordinary, or dangerous. We haven't committed euthanasia. Nonetheless, there is still a moral obligation to cure oneself, but it has to be kept within a real situation. This got a little hard in Red River County, again, where there's no hospital. What if someone begins to feel like, I'm having a heart attack? It's over an hour to drive to the closest hospital. Am I still obliged to go? Because if I get in the car, I might die in the car. And then my wife would have an accident, and she'd die too. That was a real conversation I had with someone in the parish, We here in Smith County, we're pretty blessed to have good hospitals, good Catholic hospitals close by. In 1995, the Pontifical Council of Healthcare Workers published a document, the Charter for Healthcare Workers, which was recently edited and updated. But in that original document, it makes clear that ordinary care are cures that give relations to the proportionate debt between means employed and pursued ends. And so now we see a connection the Vatican has made between ordinary and proportionate care. If things are in proportion, then perhaps that's ordinary, and so there's a bit of an obligation to receive it. If things are disproportionate, well then this is extraordinary care. We can still receive or have our loved one receive extraordinary care. If it gets way out of disproportion, then this is where you have to really think about that. Again, proportionality is the measure of the proportion that can only take place within a concrete situation. The temptation at events like this is to say, Father, can I talk about a hypothetical case? No. Because what if this, what if that, what if the other? Well, again, I'm not a doctor, but we would have to see the medical chart to know exactly what we're talking about. We have to have a live case in front of us to to understand what the proportion would be. And when we're talking about a live person, particularly at the end of life, what is proportionate changes sometimes on a daily basis. This will be important when we get into the legal documents regarding the end of life. In 1998, the United States bishops had their ad limina visit. In the Catholic Church, all the bishops of the world, roughly every 5 to 7 years, have to go visit the Holy Father, Pope in Rome. And they go by country. And Bishop Strickland, Bishop Corrala, they've talked about it, that, you walk in, there's the Holy Father seated in a chair like this, and he has this big globe next to him. He says, okay, you're the Bishop of Tyler. And he goes, well, I have no idea where Tyler is, and so you got to turn the globe and show him where Tyler is in Texas. Oh, okay, all right, now I know where they. And then he talks, well, tell me what's going on in Tyler. And so the bishop has to give the Pope an update, what's going on in the diocese. After he meets with all the bishops, then the Pope has a little audience for all the bishops. In 1998, the Holy Father chose to speak about end-of-life issues, in which he said that nutrition and hydration are ordinary, normal care. They are ordinary means for the preservation of life. Nutrition and hydration are ordinary means. Food and water are ordinary means. We have an obligation to give them to the patient. Why? Because it's the same thing for yourself, your spouse, your kids. If you were to choose not to feed them, not to allow them to drink anymore, you are making the decision to kill them. It's inherent within that particular act, within the moral object. In the Jubilee year 2000, Pope John Paul II said, one must always provide ordinary care. Recall, he just said that nutrition and hydration are ordinary care. And then he added also palliative treatment, he said, in the year 2000. Which, if I may, just to give a little tangent here, palliative treatment are treatments that are given to a patient not to cure the patient, but to ease the pain as much as possible. When the palliative doctor comes, we're not going to save the loved one. We're just going to try to make that process towards death as painless as possible. The United States is the #1 palliative care treatment country in the world. There is no one better than us. Do y'all care to guess the worst country in the world when it comes to palliative treatment? They don't allow it there. We're getting closer. Holland. There are no palliative doctors in all of Holland. And so what happens? I'm in pain! Just end this! And so that's when the euthanasia doctor walks in and says, I'll take care of that for you. This is why it's so accepted in the Dutch culture. They don't have any perception of what we here in the United States do, that you got a terminal disease? Oh, I'm really sorry. At the same time, we don't give up all hope that we've got great doctors that if they can't treat it, they'll take care of you. It won't be as horrible as it, as it was 100 years ago, or whatever. We're so advanced in this type of medicine, palliative treatment, whereby we can ease the pain as much as possible. I read a study by an Israeli. He was so pro-euthanasia that he went to Holland and Belgium to study it as much as possible, and then to write the article that was going to change the whole world. That way everyone would be pro-euthanasia. The experience of watching all of these people suffer so much, he ended up converting the other way, because he knew back in his home country that they have palliative care. his article was published. Do y'all care to guess what's now the number 2 country in the world for palliative treatment? Israel. So yeah, we get the horrible news that I or my loved one has a terminal disease. We can say in an environment like this, we can be very blunt about these things, that's horrible. At the same time, we have the best medical professionals in the world when it comes to palliative treatment that will do their best to alleviate as much of the pain as possible. They can't get rid of it all, but we have that in our own backyard. So in a situation like this, we can take a little bit of comfort from that. In 2004, recall that Pope John Paul II died in 2005. By the time 2004 rolled around, you remember his Parkinson's was so advanced he couldn't walk, he was always slumped over, and you couldn't really understand what he was saying. He muttered words and so forth, but he did write a text that was given to participants of an international congress on the vegetative state, which he made a very, very philosophical comment. He said, we talk about the vegetative state. He said, but we have to remember, man is always man. Man will never descend to be a vegetable. He was speaking from the philosophical idea of the hierarchy of being. At base, we have things like the elements. Science class, chemistry class right over here. You can see the periodic table. These fundamental things of life. When they group together, we get like rocks. Rocks, they don't move around, and they don't make babies. They're just there. When we go up the hierarchy of being a little bit, when we put these elements together, we have plants. Plants, unlike a rock, do have a little bit of life in them. They grow. They produce babies. But how many of you have ever seen a tree that decided, you know what, I'm going to move to Tyler. I heard that the weather is better there for us. They grow wherever they're at, and they stay there. They can't move. The elements, plants, then animals. Animals can not only make babies, but an animal can decide, I'm going to move to Tyler. And they just start going. But animals don't have rationality like we do. And that's why Aristotle defined human persons as rational animals. We go up higher. Human beings are the highest on this hierarchy of being in the material sense. When you go above human beings, we get to angels, and above angels is God. But of course, God and angels are not material. So on this hierarchy of being within the material sphere, the elements, plants, animals, and man. And so man can't descend to a vegetable. This is why, we hear this on the news, some of us have probably even said it, that a crazy guy, that guy's an animal. And what we mean by that is he has lost rationality. He has descended from being a man to being an animal. But it doesn't matter what happens, even if he loses his rationality, he cannot descend to be a vegetable. We do descend to be elements after death, but we pass through all of those. John Paul II said in 2004, can we stop saying vegetative state? He said, I don't know what else to call it. I'm not a doctor, but can we stop saying that? He then added more elements for ordinary care. Nutrition, hydration, palliative care, cleanliness, and warmth. And if we think about that, who among us would want our loved one lying in a bed not being bathed? How many of us would want our loved one lying in a bed cold because no one will put a cover on our loved one? So, okay, cleanliness and warmth, along with nutrition, hydration, and whatever palliative care is available. He then said that food and water, even by tubal means, is a moral obligation for they are natural means and not a medical act. Let me repeat this and then explain it. Food and water, even by tubal means, is a moral obligation, for they are natural means and not a medical act. Okay. Once again, the notion of nutrition and hydration, these are ordinary care, and therefore there's an obligation to receive them or have them administered to our loved one. There are two basic types of feeding tubes. Of course, there's the one that goes down through the throat and into the stomach. The second one is we got to slit a hole in the side, stick the tube in, cut a hole in the stomach, sew everything up. The feeding tubes that go down through the throat, with about 5 to 10 minutes of training, everyone in this room could do it. Right? Yeah. Just none of us know how to do it, and so it's like, ooh, that looks hard. With just a little bit of training, any one of us could do it. And therefore, okay, if for the loved one, and we don't want to be taking it in and out all the time, but if this was necessary, any one of us could be trained to do that. Well, I'm not a medical doctor. I imagine lots of you are not medical doctors, and so if you could be trained to do this, therefore it's not a medical act. It doesn't require a doctorate in medicine to know how to do this. Cutting a hole in someone's side, cutting a hole in the stomach, putting a tube in, tying everything off. Yeah, I want a doctor to do that. Therefore, that type of feeding tube, that's not necessarily ordinary care. You know, particularly in the context of when someone's at the end of their life, where anesthesia, surgery might knock the person over the edge. Got it, fine. But if the person is hungry and we can stick a tube down the person's throat, then we're obligated to do that. Because it doesn't require a doctor to do that. I'm sure many, if not all in this room, remember the case of Terry Schiavo in the United States, March of 2005. In the wake of all of that, the bishops of the United States got together and they wrote 2 questions that they sent to the Vatican. And unlike everything else in the church that just goes on and on and on, and you think, my gosh, when are you going to stop and sit down? The Vatican, to these 2 questions, gave a 1-word reply. The question, 1 word. The basic crux. Is food and water obligatory to vegetative state patients? The answer, yes. Period. May artificial food and water be removed after a competent doctor judges that the patient will never recover consciousness? May artificial food and water be removed after a competent doctor judges that the patient will never recover consciousness? No. No. To help us in this preparation, not only for ourselves, but for our loved ones, recall in the beginning that example of the husband and the wife. This is why it's so important that we take care of ourselves, in a sense, beforehand. We have these conversations with our loved ones, particularly those who are getting sick, or we fear that the end is near. There's 3 documents about which I'd like to speak about with this. One, commonly called a living will. I'm going to call it Advanced Medical Directive. The second, commonly called power of attorney. I'm going to call it a healthcare proxy. And then the third is just the planned giving with our financial state. So, a living will, Advanced Medical Directive. This is a document that states, ideally, I'm a Catholic. I wish to be treated in terms of what the Catholic Church teaches, particularly with regard to end of life, etc., etc. If I'm in these particular situations, treat me this way. That seals that off. But if that's the only thing that we have, then that document, is left up to the interpretation of the doctor at that point on how we're going to do this. And this is why a second document, the power of attorney healthcare proxy, is very powerful, where if I'm unconscious, then this person gets to make the decisions. He or she should make those decisions in the context of my advanced medical directive. This is an important discussion to have. Just as in every family is different, but I can imagine that, like in the case of the couple before, with that husband and that wife, the wife should not be the healthcare proxy for her husband. And that's okay. That's okay. My sister, who's the doctor, is the healthcare proxy for just about everybody in our family. She has seen this stuff so much, in a sense, she's become numb to it, and so she can make these decisions fairly rationally, even when it involves family members, because she just knows this is what should be done. Okay? That's okay if our spouse isn't our healthcare proxy. We see the power of that if we have the healthcare proxy who's able to make decisions on our behalf, and we have had this conversation with that healthcare proxy, I'm a Catholic, I want it to be done this way, or, okay, if this is my 4th time to go through chemotherapy treatments, if I go unconscious, stop. Just stop it, okay? You get to make that decision. Good. That person can do that. It's very, very important that these documents, we read them very, very closely. The Diocese of Tyler now has an attorney, Mark Henry is his name, who's an expert in reading the healthcare proxies and the advanced medical directives, because sometimes there's language in there where, even if these things, because this has happened I've experienced this myself, a good Catholic attorney who doesn't always spend his time on estate planning can write up one of these documents and not understand that just a few prepositions placed incorrectly can mean something that I don't want. And so the diocese has him as a resource. We can call him at any point in time. And he's happy to look over these documents just if we want to make sure, these documents reflect my will. The third element with this, of course, it's not easy to talk about, but we do have to do the financial planning. Just briefly to show why this is worthwhile to think about and have interesting conversations. Most winners of lotteries spend everything that they get when they take the cash option within 18 months of winning it. Well, what's the difference between winning the lottery or when Dad and Mom dies and I get this huge inheritance that just falls in my lap? I don't know how to manage that, and so that same temptation that the lottery winner has to just spend it all, so the kids have. And this is where Mark Henry's a good resource on this. There are other attorneys here in Tyler that can help. I want my kids to have the inheritance not to change their life, but to make their life easier, but not to be a source of temptation. And there's ways that legally we can do this. More detailed discussion at another time. But these are important considerations to take into effect. And as a priest, please plan your funeral. That's the last thing we want to do, is to get in the middle of one of these fights. Not that long ago, at a funeral, it's not the worst, but just to illustrate this. On the day of the funeral, the family is still fighting because some family members want the funeral mass in English, and some of them want the extraordinary form in Latin, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Whatever I come out and start celebrating, I'm going to make half the people mad, I'm going to make half the people happy, and all of this could have been avoided. In my experience as a priest that's done probably 100 funerals, if Dad and Mom, the loved ones, specify what they want, perhaps the loved ones who remain don't like those things, but if this is what Dad and Mom want, we'll do it. will do it. It's not fun to think about these things, but it's not all about me. It's for those who come after me too. I do this for them. I do this for them. Also, as a priest, this is so important. The Catholic Church provides one of the 7 sacraments that we don't talk about enough is the sacrament of the sick. James chapter 5 makes clear, are there sick among you? If yes, have them call for the priest. He will come, anoint them, lay hands on them, and the sick person's sins will be forgiven. I haven't been a priest that long, but it has happened where immediately after administering the sacrament of the sick, the person dies. It's kind of weird to look at the family and they have smiles. They eventually start to cry, but they have such perfect peace beyond all understanding. He or she was anointed just before death. Our loved one is in heaven. Wow. The church provides. And so, you don't have to raise your hand, but I ask, how many of you have your priest's emergency cell phone number in your phone so that you can call him to administer the sacrament of the sick? I understand when we have a loved one that something happens, the first thing is call the doctor, call 911. And immediately after that should be, and call Father. Folks, I have given up marriage, children, my own, whatever I wanted to do to administer this sacrament. Please call me at any hour of the day. I'm happy when it happens. Yes, Lord, it was worthwhile to get ordained to do this. I've yet to meet a priest. Oh, they called at 2 o'clock in the morning for me to go administer the sacrament of the sick. No, that's when we get excited. I was there. The Lord used me to bring salvation to this soul and peace to that person's family. That's when we get excited. So, hope all of you take care of that tonight if you don't have the priest's cell phone in your phone. We do all of this, why? Because we have hope in the resurrection. Yes, Jesus died, and all of us are going to die. But Jesus did not stay dead. He rose. Now, I don't know about you. If I were to rise from the dead, I would not want to live eternally on this earth. I'd want to go somewhere else. Well, guess what? That's the good news of Jesus Christ. Is that 40 days later, he ascended into heaven. This is why we call ourselves Christians, because we wish to follow Jesus through death, the resurrection, and the ascension into heaven. Whatever path he walked, that's what I want to walk, because I want to rise, leave this valley of tears, this earth, and go to heaven. So whatever Jesus said, whatever Jesus did, that's what I'm going to do. So that someday soon I might be with him, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and all the saints in heaven, forever and ever. Amen. That concludes the talk, so for those who need to go, feel free to excuse yourself, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that might arise. Yes, sir.
Father, can you speak to a possible difference in definition, I guess, between extraordinary needs and ordinary needs for the food and water? Because it's my understanding that among the medical community,
Yes.
they consider any food and water to be extraordinary needs.
So, nutrition, hydration, palliative care, warmth and cleanliness, these are ordinary means. when does nutrition and hydration no longer, when are nutrition and hydration no longer ordinary means? I'm sorry? Let's put it in the context of still being alive. What do y'all think?
Brain dead.
When a person's on their way, well, when my mom was in hospice,
Mm-hmm.
and she could no longer, she did not want any more food or water. She was dying, so she requested no more food or water.
Indeed. Thank you for this question. This was a point I needed to clarify before. Recall that the interruption of uncomfortable, dangerous, extraordinary means is licit. Nutrition and hydration, at a certain point in the death process, nutrition and hydration become uncomfortable. When the body, this is that whole body-soul connection, the soul kind of understands it's about time for us to separate from one another. The body recognizes this and it no longer wants nutrition and hydration. At that point, the medical term is, the body no longer assimilates nutrition and hydration. It actually tries to eject it. And this is very painful. This is one of the measures that the medical community has to know when someone is about to die. If they can no longer assimilate nutrition and hydration, that means death is here. And this is why it's pretty cool that they can call and say, you better come now, because it's here. Yeah, if they're no longer assimilating nutrition and hydration, death is close. It's very painful for the patient. And therefore, if it's uncomfortable, if it's, in a sense, dangerous, it's no longer, nutrition and hydration are no longer ordinary care, and therefore we are free to remove them. We're not removing nutrition and hydration so that you die, or to bring about that person's death. We're removing them because death is here. And these are hard situations, but at the same time there can be some solace in this. If we have seen a loved one with tubes and wires and beeps and all of this stuff going on, and we come to recognize, okay, he or she's no longer assimilating nutrition and hydration, death is here, we can pull all of this stuff, and therefore the last living memory that we have of our loved one is not with tubes and wires and machines and everything, but our loved one lying in bed. I couldn't give dad or mom a goodbye kiss because there were all these tubes coming out of his or her mouth. That's hard. So how wonderful it is that if we can recognize that, we can remove all of those things so we can have one more living encounter with our loved one, unobstructed by tubes and so forth, and wires and whatever else. So yes, nutrition and hydration are ordinary care. They should always be considered ordinary care. They become extraordinary care when the body can no longer assimilate them. And that, of course, occurs just before death. And so maybe we remove nutrition and hydration, and the person goes without food or water for a handful of hours. But all of us have missed lunch every once in a while. Yes, there's a little bit of pain, but that's nothing in comparison to everything else that's taking place. Yes, I'm hungry, but when the human person knows that death is near, we're not thinking about, I'd really like a cheeseburger right now. We're hoping that, God forgive me, let me say one more time to you, I love you, thank you so much. These are the things we're thinking about in those moments. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think that's a big misconception, like in the hospice care, that people, that food and water are withheld. They are not withheld from anyone who wants to
Yeah.
eat or drink. There's extraordinary measure, I mean, not extraordinary is the term we're talking about, but there's a great effort to provide what they would like to have, right? And I think when you're dying, no, you're not hungry, and you don't want to eat because you're sick or you're just not hungry. But that's part of, they want the terminology change from do not resuscitate to allow a natural death. Well, that's part of allowing
Mhm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have a question about the tube that goes to your stomach.
Yes,
the
ma'am.
peg tube.
The feeding tube through the stomach.
Yes, the family member is, not close to dying yet, but it's terminal.
Remember, I can't do cases because we gotta know all the data about the person.
Okay, well, she has the oxygen, but she's in bed, she's in the hospital for about a month already. Very sick. She has a tube in her nose, but, so we're being asked if we're gonna put a tube in the stomach. But she's not, I mean, she would still, nod when she's being talked to. Yes, a doctor is required to put the tube, but everybody can be trained how to, administer the food through the tube.
Once the tube is put in, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It's the question
So, I
then
mean,
is,
if we
are we
don't-
going to do the
yeah, if we
medical
don't do that,
event
right,
of inserting that tube?
yes.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if we don't do that, then we're withdrawing food and nutrition.
You said that there's already a feeding tube through the...
Right, but, I mean, it cannot be kept there for a long period.
Yeah,
You
and
don't
so...
know when.
Again, I can't speak about cases because I don't know the whole history of this particular person. This is where it gets kind of hard. But, so, let's look at the proportion here. Can the person even have the surgery? And the other question would be, what's the life expectation, for some of this? There's just so many other issues that that revolve around this. This is why we need a concrete case with all the medical history, person's age, what diseases are there. Yeah.
Without the coffee.
Okay.
So in instances like where she's talking about a real life case, are on an individual basis where can she and her doctor sit down with somebody like you
Yes.
or the bishop and go through it in detail with the records and get guidance? So if I could tell my children, any time that something happens, they can sit down with the priest.
Absolutely. I
And
mean,
they can make that decision.
Father Luke is here tonight. That's the powerful thing about Christus, is they have a priest on staff almost all the time. And therefore it should be relatively easy to get a hold of a priest at that point to have some sort of consultation about that. Yeah. But in my time as a priest, I don't know how many phone calls I've taken. Father, we're in the emergency room, or we're at the bedside. Go through the case on the phone. I never met the person. They call their pastor. The pastor says, I don't know anything about this. Call Father Anthony. They call me, and then we do it over the phone, right then and there.
And in any dilemmatic situation, we have a ethics committee in the hospital, and the case will be referred to the ethics committee.
Yeah. And Christus, just so everyone can hear that, Christus has an ethics committee that, in extraordinarily difficult cases, they can take it before them and hope to get a good answer. Yes.
You address the situation when oftentimes patients already have a peg tube long-term, or if they're in the hospital, there's an ET tube, and in the course of an acute flare of the situation, when things are going downhill rapidly, the peg tube comes out, they extubate themselves. Once there's a tube that's been in, there's one set of circumstances and obligations. But if the tube comes out, can you clarify what is moral about, do you put it back in, do you just deal with them as they are, extubated? How can you navigate that?
So that's where in these cases where if the patient has a feeding tube, through the throat or in the side, for whatever reason they are ejected, what do we do then? And so this is where the doctor's consultation becomes imperative. That what do you recommend? Is it even possible to, based upon this particular case, to put the tube back in? the doctor doesn't recommend it because of the various circumstances in that particular case, then most likely, from a moral standpoint, ethically, we don't have to. Because there's probably fairly well-founded reasons for why the doctor is saying, no, we don't have to do that at this particular point in time. The most important thing with all of this, of course, is why is the decision being made to hold that back? If it's being done to bring about the person's death, that's what's problematic. If there's a medical reason for why we're not going to do this now or ever, then it's probably okay. Does that make sense?
It does, it's just that sometimes the circumstances when the tube was initially put in
Yes.
were quite different
Oh, yeah.
than the reality of
Yep.
where they are now. Or, same thing with patients on a ventilator and who become extubated. They might have gone on vent because they were post-op or because they, had a pneumonia and, they were expected to recover from. And then you find yourself in a potential slow code situation where they become extubated, but their condition is much more dire and much more grave
Yes.
at that point. And then if the chart order hasn't been updated to reflect the changes, what do you do? And that's sometimes a dilemma.
Yeah, the whole thing gets reset in these cases. And this is why, just to emphasize the importance not only of having a good healthcare proxy, a good healthcare advanced medical directive, but to update these things constantly, to constantly have these conversations with our healthcare proxy, to perhaps in our 30s, 40s, 50s, it's enough to look at the advanced medical directive once a year, but when we get older, we probably need to look at it every couple months. If we're sick, it's something we need to be analyzing on a much more regular basis. Because indeed, the circumstances change sometimes quite rapidly. And the people are going to do the best they can to have our wishes fulfilled in those instances. Is there another question over here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, morphine is generally given, I guess, in hospice. It's a fairly regular thing. How much can you have before it's not Catholic accepted anymore?
When it becomes uncomfortable, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate. Yeah, one of my...
An overdose will kill you, right?
Sure, and so, we're placing, this is, this requires a conversation with the doctor, the healthcare provider. What is it that I want? One of my classmates did the study on, the medical term just escapes me, where we take morphine, for example, at a level where it forces us into an unconscious state. Of course, this gets really tricky, knowing exactly what that level is. Can we do that? Well, yeah. I might judge that that's dangerous for me, but at the same time, my sister, doctor, says, we got this. We know exactly how much you need. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, if you say so. If I'm in Congo, the Democratic Congo, and someone there tells me, we're going to give you morphine to put you in an unconscious state. No, thank you. I don't trust you. But again, here in the United States, we're palliative care. We're #1 in the world. I'd expect the doctor to know what he's talking about. I can have great faith that we can do this.
I'm thinking about a particular individual that we visited, I guess, one day before he died, and he was in hospice at the time, in hospice, and he didn't want morphine because he wanted to be able to talk to all of us.
Yeah.
Okay? The next day, when they started the morphine, that was it. Now, Now, he was absolutely cognitive, could carry on an intelligent conversation, knew all our names, knew everything, and the next day he's gone from cancer. I just have always wondered, was that just one extra shot there, or what happened? And if that's the case, I mean, is that an accidental kind of thing, or?
This is a medical question, and we got a doctor in the back, and so.
Just happened to think of that.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I've done hospice for 23 years, part of full time, but it's the principle, like the feeding. It's like, if I give you morphine to kill you, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And not acceptable at all. If I give you morphine to ease your suffering, as only titrated very carefully, as needed to ease your suffering, and in that you may be asleep, maybe you don't eat, maybe you die, but that was not my intention. My intention was really, and it's a principle of double effect. It's an ethical principle. And, but you're right, it's sometimes taken, I'll say individuals, I think, take it the other way. You know, I've had questions come up that, well, this doctor just put a drip on, a morphine drip,
Right.
and just ran it.
And that's what I wonder,
And
once
that's not
you're
right.
unconscious, do you take the morphine away and say, okay, as long as this person's not, rolling around in bed or something, they probably don't need it.
Right, you should lower it, and especially if they're saying they want to be awake, that they're willing to suffer some in order to interact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very good. That was good.
All right. Thank you all for coming. We'll conclude with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace. Good night.